Welcome to Accountable, where your business is our business. Hosted by David R. Peters. Today's guest is Nikissia Craig.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Accountable, the podcast for CFOs by a CFO. Hey, my name's Dave. Thanks so much for being here this week. This week, we have a very important topic to discuss, and that is a topic that has been in the media a lot more recently. It's not a new topic. It's not a new idea. It's not a new concept. But I think that just with everything going on with the pandemic, it's just something that has just been more in our focus lately. It's just been something that has gotten a lot more attention. Mental wellness. And this is something that I have to tell you that for me personally, I am glad that this is getting the attention it is in the media these days. I mean, the pandemic, I think, was rough on everybody, not just financially, not just, from kind of a disruption in our everyday kind of a way. I think that this was, the pandemic was difficult also because a lot of us dealt with some things that maybe we, could kind of push away during the pandemic. There were some things that we had to deal with, maybe some underlying issues with family, with friends, dealing with being alone, dealing with, separation from loved ones for extended periods of time. And I think that the pandemic really kind of forced a lot of that stuff up to the surface. And so because of that, mental wellness has gotten a lot more attention. And I think it's a good thing. And it's something that we as financial leaders in our organizations, we need to have some insight into maybe how we can help some of our colleagues, some of our other employees, some of the folks that we work around every day. We need to have some insight into kind of what they are dealing with, and maybe if they are going through some mental wellness issues, if there's things that are on their mind that are serious, I think that it would be good for us to have some insight into, maybe what we can do about that, how we can help those people. And so today we're going to be talking about mental wellness in the workplace. What does that mean? What does that sort of look like? And probably more importantly, what can we as financial leaders and as leaders within our organization, how can we recognize when somebody really needs help? So that's our topic for today, and my guest is Nikissia Craig. Nikissia is a social worker, and she is also the CEO of Whole Journey Services. They are a group in Virginia, in the Virginia Beach area, and they do a lot of work with folks who are dealing with mental wellness challenges. And we wanted to I wanted to just have some time to sort of talk with her about things that we could do as financial leaders to sort of recognize when something might not be right with one of our colleagues. And not from the standpoint that we could ever be social workers. I know that, we're not social workers. We're financial leaders. That's what we do. But I think that we could probably stand to be a little bit better as an industry in terms of kind of recognizing these things, because the people that are around us are important, and they help make our companies run. So why would we not want to do what we can to help them if they truly are having a problem? And so that's our topic for today. I think this is a great topic. It's a timely topic. It's one that the media and the folks around us, we're seeing this topic kind of of all over the place. And so I think it's a great one to talk about here and now. So anyway, I hope that you find this conversation insightful. I know I certainly had found it to be interesting and definitely picked up some things. So I hope that you do as well. So enjoy my conversation with Nikissia Craig. My guest this week on Accountable is Nikissia Craig. Nikissia, thanks so much for being here on Accountable.
Thank you so much for having me today.
So tell me a little bit about your practice, because I have to tell you that for a lot of us, I think a lot of us that are in the business world, maybe we really haven't, explored, mental health issues. And so we may not really understand kind of what type of help is out there and kind of what some of those differences are. So if you wouldn't mind just talking a little bit about your practice, the kind of issues that you deal with, things like that, just give us kind of an introduction into your practice and what you do.
Well, yeah, thanks for that. I think that in the best words I could find to describe Whole Journey, I would describe it as a wellness practice. And I think that's important because so often the idea of mental health and emotional health has been stigmatized.
Right.
And so when we think about a wellness-based practice that really encompasses emotional well-being, mental well-being, spiritual well-being, financial well-being, it really opens up our clients to look at themselves from different angles, right? And to really sort of explore who they are, who they maybe want to become, what's holding them back. So we deal with a variety of issues. We're a group practice, meaning that there are multiple therapists, right? And so we typically work with clients as early as 3 to 5 years old to, clients well into their 60s, right? Across the lifespan, because life is always happening to us. And we can work with anything from anxiety to separation, divorce, trauma, mood issues, work-life balance, pandemic stress, grief and loss. And so that's kind of the benefit of having a group practice where you have multiple issues that can be addressed.
Okay. All right. So now, is every practice kind of a group practice? I know that may seem like a really simple question, but, again, I'm trying to understand sort of, some of the differences between the different practices that are out there. I mean, is every practice a group practice?
No, that's a good question, actually. And no, all practices are not created equal.
Okay.
A lot of times you'll find that a lot of us as, whether we're mental health professionals, social workers, counselors, we can work solo and have our own individual practices. And sometimes you'll find us in community settings, group practices like my own. So it really just kind of depends. There's a spectrum and a gamut. But I will say, of course, I'm an advocate of group practices, right? Because I have one. The benefit is really being able to work with different issues in a more specialized way.
Okay.
So, in Virginia, because I'm not originally from Virginia, I felt like when I moved here, things were so spread out,
right.
And you have to go over here for this, you have to go over there for that. And the beauty of a practice like our own and like of other group practices is that, your child could be seen over here and maybe your grandparent, maybe your spouse, maybe you could do couples counseling. So there's power in a group practice in that it can really sustain a multitude of issues within a family.
Okay. All right. So the ability to sort of have things kind of in one area as opposed to maybe having sort of a specialist for one thing where we got to go, one spot, to get sort of one type of help. In this case, a group practice, we kind of see everything kind of all together. Okay. All right. Very good. So I think that, we would almost sort of be remiss, I think, if we didn't mention that, mental health has become more of an issue, I think, in the media and just kind of a focus for us in society, I would say, in general, more recently. And I wondered, is there a reason for that? I mean, is there a sort of something that sort of happened or, is it COVID related? what is it that now it seems like mental health is really on the radar screen? Because I'm not sure that it necessarily was before. I mean, feel free to push back, but I sort of feel like this is kind of an issue. It's not a new issue, but I think that, the focus is just seems a lot more on mental health than maybe it ever has been before.
No, that's such a good point. And I think you're right on the money with that, right? So I think, of course, the pandemic just sent mental health through the roof. There was a point where we all kind of just closed up shop and went home one day.
Right.
And we didn't know what was going to happen. No one had a rule book, or at least, I didn't have access to it. I think a lot of us didn't have access to how we were going to navigate this. So, all of us, it's hard to find someone who did not sort of have to take another look at their lives, take another look at their values. When we all went home and just saw all of our plans go off the calendar, per se, right? So I think that with the pandemic stress of it all, people didn't quite know what they were going through, but they knew they were going through something. Right. And it became difficult to really understand that. I can say in full transparency, as a mental health professional, to go through something while your clients are also going through it was really, really unsettling.
Yeah.
And that's what happened to us. We were going through it and are still going through it as well. So it was as if a magnifying glass, came into all of our homes.
Right.
For those of us that were able to keep our homes and to keep jobs. And it really made us look at our relationships. Do I really like my partner? I don't really like my kid anymore. I didn't realize I didn't know my child. It made us have to all look at ourselves and each other in a different way. And that created a lot of stress, at a minimum, but a lot of anxiety and depression as well. And so, in our practice, we saw that from children on up through the lifespan because people were isolated. People did not have control over their lives. And there was no way to even give the illusion that we had it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. So I think I want to kind of point us back to some of the things that I think you said there, because I think you said a lot. Sort of the feeling of isolation during the pandemic, that feeling of sort of being out of control, and also sort of being asked to confront some things, that may not necessarily be nice things to talk about, right? In my relationship with my spouse, I want that to be a good thing. I want that to be sort of a positive thing. And yet, the pandemic, when you're kind of around each other sort of all the time, that's, maybe that forces some things to the surface that maybe were kind of, less obvious, I guess, before.
Yes. We saw, in the mental health, we saw divorces skyrocketing.
Right. Okay.
Because there were some realities, it's like, I actually don't like to even hear you breathe. Now, what to do with that information? Do we work on this and go to couples counseling? Do we go to individuals counseling? And a lot of parents too. So you're so right. It was just very difficult to escape the reality of a lot of the things that we were able to maneuver around and distract ourselves with all of our busyness pre-pandemic. I could busy myself enough to not have to really focus on myself and to notice that I'm having a lot of anxiety or stress, or I'm unhappy,
right?
Or I feel lost. But yes, the pandemic revealed a lot of it. And in a lot of ways, there was no Band-Aid. So the stress and the tension of it all became palpable. Yeah. You felt it. We all felt it. And even if it wasn't for ourselves, we felt it for other people. Yeah. Because it was hard to know someone who wasn't unscathed in some kind of way or feeling like they might be on the brink one day.
Right. I think that that's an excellent point. I mean, what a unique time where sort of everybody is going through this traumatic time kind of all together. I mean, that's a very unique situation. I'm going to ask you something that I think is, and maybe this is a bit of an odd question, but do you look at all of the attention that's really being placed on mental health right now? Is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? Because I think, sometimes I think in certain instances, maybe that you could maybe make a case that, kind of too much attention on an issue actually works against it. I would think that more of the attention on mental health would be a positive thing, but I'd be curious to see, to hear what you would say to that. I mean, is all this attention good?
I think it always depends on your perspective, right? And how you hold it. I think there's arguments to be made for both sides, but I would lean towards it's a good thing. I think that overall, having more understanding of what someone else just might be going through, of what you might be going through, really creates an opportunity for resolution, right? And so I think even in a time like the pandemic, when we were all trying to figure out what really mattered to us and really trying to hold on to those things, being able to get back to a very fundamental human level with ourselves and each other is important. And so, I look at certain appreciations, like how, we were applauding the healthcare workers,
right?
Things like that. I don't think that had ever really happened in my time.
Right.
And so I think that more exposure on mental health creates opportunities for resolution and growth. I think it destigmatizes it from being like that thing or that piece, that scary issue over there. And I think that for a lot of people, we understood that it also wasn't a luxury.
Right.
Because I think sometimes we think of things like counseling and therapy as a luxurious sort of lifestyle benefit versus probably a very basic thing that we all need to do. If you're willing to go and get a health physical every year, why not go and see a counselor once a year and check in and just see like how I'm really processing and dealing with life's issues. I think maybe the downside, if I could make an argument for it, might be that maybe so many things were put into the mental health bucket that just probably weren't wholly based off of a mental health issue.
Right.
And so I think sometimes mental health becomes a catch-all for other issues and society ills, right? But I would lean towards the understanding and the education being more helpful for our society and our families and our communities than harmful overall.
I think that, rightly or wrongly, I would say that, at least kind of before kind of more recent times, I almost think that on some level that mental health issues were looked at as being sort of lesser than, right? I mean, it was looked at as being kind of, if I have something sort of physically wrong with me, well, then that's an issue. We got to deal with that, as an employer, that's something that, that I have to deal with. If there's something sort of mentally wrong with me, well, it's kind of like, well, leave that person alone, give them some space, right? As the, kind of the old phrase goes, right? And they'll take care of that themselves. That's a private matter. You employer, you stay out of that. Is that accurate, or is that I don't know? Maybe that's accountants being too negative.
No, I think that's very real, and I think even outside of the accountant aspect of things, that's how a lot of workplaces navigate mental health, and a lot of times how they frame it. Because I think sometimes too, we know that with a physical health issue, it's appropriate to be sympathetic.
Right.
If I came in the office and my leg was broken, you would maybe get the elevator for me. You might want to make sure that my leg was elevated from time to time. But if I came into the office and my anxiety was through the roof, someone might struggle with, I don't know what to say. Like,
right.
Are you okay? And then if she says no, I don't know what to do. So I think too, just not even knowing how to navigate a mental health issue is a thing that people struggle with in the workforce.
I think that you're dead on that. I think that that's absolutely correct. Let's talk about that idea here, because we're throwing out terms, and I think at least for some of us, and I'm sure that for a lot of our colleagues that are listening to this podcast, a lot of the financial leaders that are out there, we don't even know the terms. One that we hear a lot is this idea of kind of emotional health. Okay, so
Yeah.
what exactly does that mean? I mean, if I am emotionally healthy, what is that term? And because it's like we're throwing around terms and we don't even really completely know what we're talking about. I feel like we as financial leaders, we don't always necessarily know what we're talking about as executives. What does it mean to you when I say that someone is emotionally healthy? What does that term really mean?
I think that it's something to note that sometimes we are interchangeably using terms.
Right.
So I would not get bogged down into the words. I know it's like a very, PC sort of culture, but the simple question is really, how are you feeling?
Okay.
Like, how are you doing? So when I think about emotional health, for me, it comes down to, an internal and an external probably condition, right? So how are you feeling? Are you able to manage those feelings? Do you feel like you have control over them? What are your thoughts like?
Okay.
Are they really negative? Are they intrusive? Are they racing? Do you like yourself?
Right.
On average? How are you treating others?
Right.
All of these can be indicators of emotional health. But if you were to sort of, use a broad brush and paint, mental health goes in that as well. So I think sometimes, if I could just be a little critical,
Yeah.
I think sometimes we talk about emotional health to try to water down mental health.
Interesting.
And they
Okay.
are so interchangeable that it's important to note. So I think sometimes we're afraid as maybe leaders and or colleagues, right, that if we say that someone might be having a mental health issue, we've crossed a line.
Okay.
So emotional health to me feels like a B version of it. Like I'm sort of trying to see if we're trickling up to something more severe. But they go very much hand in hand.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
sometimes it's just semantics, and I want to put it out there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. I mean, especially in our world, it's about saying the right words.
Yeah.
A lot of times, and I think anybody, if you're listening out there in accountable land, I mean, we know this. I mean, business has buzzwords. There are certain words that and phrases that we use all the time. I don't know that this is really anything different, so sort of maybe, if I say sort of emotional health, that, maybe somehow that's, something less, but it's also maybe more acceptable,
Yeah, it's like framing our practice from a wellness perspective.
Right. There you go.
It feels less stigmatizing. It feels more broad, right? And so because of, sometimes the history with mental health and the stigma, we do have to find ways to communicate the message in a way that's receivable to different types of people.
So how exactly do we separate kind of, somebody kind of having a bad day versus like, something that is more important, something that is more, something that we need to pay some attention to? Because I think a lot of our listeners, they're financial leaders in their company. Maybe they want to do something, to help out, their employees, or they may see somebody struggling, but they're not really quite sure how to sort of make that separation. What does that look like to you? What would you say, to someone like that?
Yeah, I would say that in my experience, we're tending to look at trends. That's one
Right.
way, right? A bad day is a bad day. And I think, too, there's context for bad periods of life. Like if I'm going through a divorce, I might have a string of bad days, or it might be kind of up and down, right? So we're looking at something that's not just isolated, but a pattern over time. So even if we look from a mental health perspective in our diagnostic manual, issues for a lot of issues, more than 2 weeks, 30 days, we're probably looking at something that is either an organic issue maybe happening in the brain, environmental, like the workplace, right? The workplace can also create some mental health and emotional health struggles. And then circumstantial as well. So you want to look at different things, because sometimes in an effort to really rationalize and normalize what we're going through, we're looking at the highest potential
Yeah.
issue. Like, well, it hasn't been 2 years. Yeah, but it's been 30 days. And my sort of line in the sand as a mental health professional is often about the issue of suffering.
Okay.
And if you have access to resources, if you have supports, why would you allow yourself to suffer?
Right.
Life is short. I think we're all learning that as well. So I really challenge people to not be afraid to ask the question directly, and I would be looking at inconsistencies across a certain time period with someone. And sometimes, to be frank, in certain work settings, you're hearing that someone is going through something.
Right.
Susan is going through a breakup. That, Mr. Smith's son is having a lot of difficulties in school. We're aware of these things. And sometimes we disregard that or we dismiss it because maybe we wouldn't handle it the same way. Or maybe it wouldn't be something that gets us down and discouraged in that sort of way. But to me, it comes down to this idea of suffering and why suffer needlessly.
Yeah. So, I mean, is it possible to sort of train managers and, kind of folks in the business world to sort of spot problems in their employees? Or is it really just kind of a matter of, I know my employees, I know the folks that, help me along as a manager and, support me in everything that I do. And I just know that something's up here because I know that this person, that they typically don't act this way and they've been like this for a while and I'm going to dig in. So is it a matter of just kind of knowing somebody is there truly kind of training that we can do to really sort of be better at, recognizing issues when they may arise?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. And I think the answer is layered in like, yes, 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 yes.
Okay.
Right. So I think that, I can sometimes tell in an email, like that doesn't really sound like that person,
Right.
or, in their tone of voice or in a bit of a, erraticness that wasn't ever present, that something's changed. So I think a part of it is recognizing and really knowing your people and your staff. I think too that on some level, as managers, leaders, we get trained on so much, but not like the people side of things, not the emotional side of things. And yes, I think training should be there. A lot of companies bring in consultants to do some workshopping with leadership and with staff members too, to really create a safe space to put that on the table. Right. So I do think it's a layered approach in that you kind of have to know your people and build a relationship, to see when someone is struggling. I think a part of it too is an intentionality about being willing to check in about these things and creating a safe space to be able to have this dialogue. Like, are you struggling? Is everything really okay?
Right.
Being able to ask a direct question. And I would say, if you're concerned about pushback or defense, being prepared to bring to the table very specific behaviors that the person could also recognize as that's kind of like, yeah, that's not totally me as well. So I think the specifics and bringing that to check-ins and bringing that to the table can be helpful. But I think definitely, ongoing training with managers, leadership. And then I think too, what really, really packs a powerful punch is modeling it yourself.
Right. Right.
So when you are someone who is also engaged in a routine that addresses your own emotional and mental health, it sets the tone that it's okay to talk about it. It sets the tone that it's okay for your employees or staff to struggle with it as well.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I'll just talk from my own, personal experience here too, folks. Those of you that are listening, I don't know that I've ever had an employee, someone in my team that I've ever actually, reached out to and said, are you doing okay? That has ever sort of, bitten my head off as a result of that. I don't know that has ever gone in a hard negative direction. And so I do think that there is, something to that, I mean, we do kind of have this maybe unfounded fear that if we ask somebody kind of how they're doing and actually mean it, okay? I mean, we ask people how they're doing all the time, okay?
Yeah.
But actually mean it, that somehow that's gonna float across as negative. I don't know that I've ever experienced that has ever been the case.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're spot on with that. And I think that probably speaks to the type of relationship that you build with your team.
Right.
Right. And so where I hear the most pushback and the most defensiveness, because I'm seeing it every day. There are people coming out of the workforce every day, needing, short-term disability because of the stress of their jobs they feel. But the manager above them has not created a safe space to really share the depth of what they're going through, and has not been very clear that this conversation will not be used against you.
Right.
But I want to know how you feel. But
Right.
The long story short, that just kind of goes to the type of relationship that you're probably cultivating with your team members, where they can receive your concern and not see it as critique or an attempt to sort of push them out the door, take some sort of, punitive action against them.
And I also think too that this is really a movement that has sort of almost flies in the face of kind of what we have typically been taught as managers, as leaders, as CFOs, as controllers, is that there always used to be sort of this spoken or unspoken thing where it's just like you have your personal life, you have your business life. Don't create relationships with with the folks that are in your team, or at least not much of one, because it just makes your business life harder. Don't do that. And that may be, again, maybe that's the accountant in me kind of being, kind of having a negative perspective, but I do think that there's something to that.
Yeah.
And so this, I mean, on some level, the reason why I think it's scary and the reason why I think it's challenging is because the manager, if you're in the management role, you're kind of making yourself vulnerable to a point.
Sure.
Because you are forming a relationship with folks in your team.
Yeah. But I think that's a hallmark of good leadership, vulnerability.
Right.
Like, people working under you are kind of investing in your vision, and they're kind of investing in the goals, that this team has. And so vulnerability is a piece of it if you really want to have a team that has sustainability and a team that has depth and concern. Like, that's a part of the workplace environment that just kind of has to be addressed. And I definitely agree. I think that where managers maybe sometimes get it wrong, and there's always room for improvement, is that there's also the idea of boundaries.
Right.
And so instead of sometimes trying to really figure out where the boundaries are, I would just rather not talk about that.
Right.
Instead of knowing that, if I'm bringing someone to have a conversation with them, I'm making it very clear that they don't owe me an explanation.
Right.
I'm making it very clear that you don't have to disclose what you're doing when you use your sick time for your mental health.
Right.
But I'm also, as a manager, bringing to the table solutions if this is an issue for you, and I'm trying to normalize that struggle. So also, I think when it comes to sort of that vulnerability piece and the disclosure piece, also just only sharing what someone maybe needs to know about you. Maybe you don't go into the divorce details and that really bad night. But maybe you're just expressing the fact that, I've gone through struggles. Life has not gone as I had planned for it as well. So I empathize with you. I also want to know how I can support you.
Yeah. Yeah.
It feels different.
Yeah, for sure. I think also too, one thing that I will throw out there is the importance of sort of giving people the space to kind of talk about it too. I mean, I think sort of that gets into the importance of kind of good listening and things like that. Some of the folks that are listeners to this show, that I used to work as a hospital chaplain, and one of the things that that I actually learned from one of my mentors in that role is that if you listen long enough, people will tell you things.
Oh, my goodness, yes.
And so there you go. Okay, so I think that there is something there too. I mean, kind of being able to be a good listener, giving people space. I think all of those things, things sort of play into what we're talking about here, and being a good leader.
Absolutely. No, you're so right about that. I think that sometimes if you are a manager or a leader, you are Mr. or Mrs. Fix-It.
Right.
You're used to being the fire truck, the EMT, metaphorically speaking. So it's hard to then maybe sometimes come into a meeting and be comfortable with, having the intentionality of just listening. So being able to say, I just want to hear how you're doing. Can we set the work task to the side?
Right.
And being comfortable with someone getting uncomfortable with that idea, because who really listens to us in this day and age? That feels different in a work environment, and being able to fully receive their information, not just action plan around it. So there's a balance there, and it takes time and practice navigating it, but it can definitely be more helpful for you and for an employee or a team member that's struggling.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. This show in particular, we talked to a lot of financial professionals, and we talked a little bit earlier on about, sort of how people dealt with, one of the most stressful situations that there was, the COVID pandemic, and kind of all of the, sort of emotional issues that surfaced kind of during that. One of the things that, especially in the accounting and finance industry, and this is, kind of rightly or wrongly, I think certain positions within finance and accounting tend to be pretty high stress jobs. I mean, businesses, if you are the financial officer of that business, there's a lot of stress that goes along with that. I was a CFO for a startup entity. There was stress that went along with that. For those folks that work in public accounting, again, rightly or wrongly, not making a judgment call on it, but necessarily, but I do think it does have some degree of a reputation of kind of being a churn and burn type of industry. A lot of public accounting firms, they kind of know that, when I hire a group of new people, that there's going to be a certain group that doesn't make it. I guess I would just be curious as to how exactly, is there ways to sort of navigate those kind of high stress times, tax season, kind of the heavy audit season, times where, board meetings, for those of you that are CFOs out there, is there ways that we can sort of more positively handle those stressful times? Because I think that especially in the finance industry, especially in the accounting industry, there are some heavy duty stressful times for those folks.
No, you're so right. I have quite a few clients in that industry. And so, yeah, it's imperative that we keep all our appointments during that time period for them, right? So I think that kind of goes to the fact that if you know that you're in a high stress season, or your career revs up during certain times of the year, certain seasons, it's really, really important that is when your toolkit, your emotional toolkit, your mental health toolkit is in rotation and in heavy rotation. So I think that too, even in our industry, in my practice, we work with billable hours, right? So
Sure.
There's an incentive to max out if you can, if you want that. And what I had to do even with the pandemic was really actually survey our team and to see from their perspective what would have the most return on their emotional and mental well-being, because the financial piece is taken care of, right? So I think that's something for CFOs and leaders to really take a look at. Should I ask my team players what would matter to them? And looking to see if that investment can be made in little ways that would just help get through that season. I think it's important, again, that modeling piece. I think it's important to be intentional about having check-ins. And I think from like a coping perspective, it's really important to give your team members access to tools that they can use, right? So even from a perspective in our practice, I had to sort of dial back all the technical pieces of a meeting and implant something that was based on sort of recharging them or refueling them. But the eager beaver A-type person in me wanted to max out all the things you need to know to go rock and roll, you know?
Yeah, sure.
So I think, instead I had to start doing self-assessments and giving them tools to self-assess in their own time, their own well-being, and then give them resources to address it. I think we need to have repeated conversations about if you offer benefits, EAP benefits,
right.
Making it very clear that you can just go in and call someone and get some support as well. So those are just some of my starter list of things that CFOs, leaders need to do. But the most helpful tool for me was to actually survey my team.
So there you go, folks. And I would challenge folks too. I mean, and I think sometimes we as an industry, sometimes we are quickly sort of dismiss things like that. We say, well, busy season's always tough, or, things like that. I can tell you as a tax practitioner, tax season's always tough. That's true. But if we really care about the team, if we really care about the people in it, and we really are trying to, do something positive, I think we kind of make time for the things that are important to us. And so I think I would kind of challenge folks that are out there to maybe try to think of ways, where are some spots where maybe we as an industry can maybe do a little bit better here, especially as, we're talking as if the sort of the pandemic's over. There's still a lot of people working from home and things like that.
Yeah.
And, so I don't know that, that's necessarily, if we're talking about it completely in the past, I don't know if that's accurate or not. So, but anyway, I would just kind of challenge some of the listeners to kind of think about this a little bit more. Is there anything that you would say, because, how do you create sort of a workplace that where it's okay to talk about mental health issues? I mean, is it really kind of this tone at the top idea that we need to somehow implement? Is there certain sort of tangible things that that we can do that maybe, I guess tangible is maybe not the right word, but concrete things that maybe we should implement, different policies and things like that? How do we create sort of this workplace culture where mental health and talking about mental health issues, where that's okay? Because I think a lot of us, that's really the challenge.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to kind of address that. I think that it definitely is a top-down experience, meaning that your leadership really has to buy into the value of it, right? Because a lot of the criticism that I hear on the employee side is they feel like it's a talking point. They feel like it's something that's put in the brochure or the job ad when they applied for the job, but they don't feel like that's really something that seems important in their workspace. So as, managers, CFOs really do have to sort of examine really where is our investment? Because the truth is that your most valuable resource are your people.
Sure.
And so how do we maximize productivity? Well, it's about them feeling healthy. It's about them feeling connected. Those are just things that will lengthen your lifespan in general, right? But it also lengthens your ability to stay in the workforce productively. So we have to shift our mentality, one, to really buy into the importance of it and not make it a talking point or like a 5-minute check-in, smiley face, sad face, which is what I'm hearing, So the mentality needs to be there. I think we have to sort of assess the team players as well, though, because different things will work for different teams. Sometimes teams need smaller spaces to develop this sort of trust so that they can check in and share. So even if there are smaller groups within a team where they check in with each other, where there may be accountability partners for their own emotional mental health, things like that I've seen have gone pretty well overall. I think, of course, bringing in ongoing support has been helpful for teams too. Just to have, wellness and morale events can be helpful. And I think when we're looking at policies, we really want policies that aren't punitive for the issue. Because again, some of the pushback that I hear in my appointments comes from employees who have disclosed some struggles that they're having, issues that they're having. They're being told it's okay, but it feels punitive, some of the courses of action that come afterwards. So they're regretting even having the conversation and being open about it. So we as leaders have to look at, are our policies counterintuitive?
Right.
how does it feel to be on the other side of this policy with this particular issue? And we have to own a certain level of responsibility for that too when we're talking about policies. But I would say a consistent, intentional engagement could be really helpful. And I think sometimes leaders get disconnected from how much influence that they have. So if I flip the script over, I try to make sure that there are meetings that I'm not a part of so that my team members can critique, can be more open, right? They can be more vulnerable because the person who owns the company is not there in the meeting. And so I just think as leaders, that's a part of me, being self-aware that my presence might cause someone to be more closed off than open. So there's different ways to handle it depending on your team, depending on the goal. But I think the first part is really making it an actionable goal.
So I think that that's a great point. Trying to make this into an actionable goal, something that we can do something about. I think that that's a great first step. So I feel like we are just sort of scratching the surface here. I mean, and we, in this conversation, but probably also we as a society. I mean, we're kind of just sort of scratching the surface here. If our listeners would like to get a hold of you, how might they be able to do that?
Sure. Well, we have a Facebook page, Whole Journey Wellness. And so if you'd like to maybe get some encouragement, get some updates on things, we can be found on Facebook, on Instagram. Also, our website, wholejourneywellness.com, is a good place to get additional information. Maybe see if you would want to schedule an appointment, maybe just someone that might be struggling, and it's something to keep in the back pocket because we kind of never know when life is going to overwhelm us and kind of get to us or someone that we know. So those would be really easy avenues that I'd recommend people consider for sure.
Yeah. So, well, I think that this is a great topic. I really do. And this is something that, we as leaders in the financial industry, folks, we need to work through this. This is something that, we need to continue to make steps on. And I think, in the end, I think this is steps in the right direction. And so, so ultimately, we as leaders need to continue to try to be better to not only ourselves, but the folks, our teammates that are working with us, our colleagues, and the folks that we rely on in the business world every day. So, well, thank you so much, Nikissia. I appreciate your time, and thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Accountable. Be sure to subscribe for more interviews and insights from today's business leaders. David Peters is a registered representative offering securities through Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services offered through Carroll Financial Associates, a registered investment advisor. Peters Tax Preparation, David Peters Financial, Carroll Financial, and Cetera Advisor Networks are not affiliated. He is located at 1657 West Broad Street, Unit 5, Richmond, Virginia, 23220, and can be reached at 804-332-1373. The views depicted in this material are for information purposes only and not necessarily those of Cetera. They should not be considered specific advice or recommendations for any individual.